Hi everyone, today I'm going to be doing a review and demonstration of this LG F4X1009NWK. Now I've had this for a couple of months now, I think maybe 2 or 3. It'll be more like 3 or 4 at the time of filming, at the time of the video releases, but at the time of filming I think it's about 2.5 months. So I thought I'd give it a bit of a review basically on how well I've got on with the machine in the time that I've owned it, and basically my overall opinion on it. So I'm going to start off by saying it's sounding like it's starting to rain. I'm in a room with a plastic roof, so if it does start to rain, you are going to hear it, so I apologise in advance for that. Now, some basic information about the machine. It has a 9 kilogram capacity, however it still has the old 58 litre drum that the 7 and 8 kilo models had in older ranges. It does have the old style drum with these old paddles, as you can see, and the old backplate and the old sill design as well, which is one of the main reasons I went for this model over another higher end model or one of the AIDD ranges, because personally, I don't like the style of the AIDD drum or door sill. I prefer like a smooth door sill, sort of like these ones have. And as for the drum, I like the style of this one more. Half because it's what I'm used to, but half because this one does a much better job at tumbling the clothes. And yeah, also the AIDD models and anything with the AIDD drum has softer suspension, whereas this one still uses the old stiff suspension that my washer dryer uses, my LG washer dryer, which is very difficult to move even when you're putting a lot of weight on it, which is exactly how I like it. It is much quieter actually, and I'll talk about that more later, but it's much quieter than some other LGs. And yeah, I'll speak more about that later because it might not stay like that. It spins at 1400 RPM. I don't know if I said that already, but that's its maximum speed. You can vary it from, so I think the options are 0, 400, 800, 1000, 1200 and 1400. But 1400 is its highest. So yeah, I'm going to go over some of my favourite, or not necessarily my favourite, but some cycles that I would use a lot. So we'll start out with cotton. So cotton is it's a good cycle for almost everything basically. So it can go short or it can go long. It depends on the loads that you put in there, because obviously it comes up with LG's typical 3 dashes, meaning it's going to be automatic length. So it will range from about 1 hour and 20 up to about 3 hours 15. Depends on the load size. Obviously the bigger the load, the more it's going to sense. And well, I say the bigger, the heavier the load, the more it will sense to, because it's done based on weight being dry sensing rather than based on the amount of water the load takes, which is the case on some other machines like this Candy next to it. So that's a good cycle. It does 2 rinses by default on the cotton cycle. However, there is a towel cycle in the app which does a 3rd rinse. Other than that, it's identical to cotton. So that's something to bear in mind. There's also Allergy Steam, which does 4 rinses. So if you need sensitive skin and stuff, that's a good cycle to use. Did actually film that only yesterday at the time of filming, and it's very thorough with rinsing, but it is a long one. The other good cycle is mixed fabric. So that's a slightly shorter version of cotton. It's about the same sort of at the minimum length, so about 1 hour 15, 1 hour 20 at the lowest, but it only goes up to about 1 hour and 49 minutes. So if you want a shorter wash for a bigger load, this is ideal. It is designed for only a half load, but it will wash a full load very happily. And the other one is Easy Care, which is an alternative to cotton. It's not quite as long, so it's a fair middle ground between mixed fabric and cotton. So it its maximum length is about 2.5 hours or so. So yeah. And then for your more delicate stuff, the delicate cycle is a good option. The wall cycle on LGs is not recommended because it's just there's sort of no different. There's no baseline between delicates and wall, so there's like no middle ground. Wall is barely any movement, and then delicates is somewhat intensive. So realistically, hand wash on wall on LG is not going to get anything clean, but delicates will, while maintaining while keeping the fabric safe, is what I'm trying to say. And then finally, of course, you've got your downloaded cycle, which I briefly mentioned Allergy Care or Allergy Steam, which is the baseline. So that's the default cycle on here. So that's a good one. You've also got baby care, you've got towels, you've got sleeve hems and collars, you've got duvet. You have, I think it's about 10 or 11 cycles in the app to make use of. So you have a fair selection for being the low end model, which I think is quite nice. So yeah, a couple of options. The only options really you get on the machine is delay end and pre-wash, which is combined in one button. So it's a very standard low end machine with obviously only what you need. But I quite like that and I think it's good. So moving on, we're going to talk about reliability and overall user experience now. Now reliability, because it's such a brand new machine, I can't really comment on that. But so far, being a couple of months old, it's only had about 30 washes at the time of filming, so I can't really comment on things like the shock absorbers or its general reliability because obviously it's so new. However, my experience with it, I am satisfied with the way it washes and rinses and spins. It's very much like my older one in the sense that it washes brilliantly, it rinses well, it spins well. It's kind of what you would expect from an LG. However, there are some annoyances, and while I won't mention all of them quite yet, because a lot of them are to do with programming, which is the next section, generally my gripe with this machine is it lacks sort of the customization and the uniqueness between cycles that my older LG has, and I think that's my main annoyance with it. But as a machine overall, it's really not bad. It is a little bit expensive for what it is, so I would have paid £400 for this at the time because it was on offer. But at that time, the original price would have been $550, which I think is a lot for this machine, an awful lot considering the options you get. But it is a nice machine. So and it's real. It is built well as well. Like there's no creaking or anything, except there, but it's very minor compared to my Candy next to it. So yeah, really solid build quality. Not much different to my older one, which is really good. Anyway, more about that later. Moving on, programming and performance. Now this is where it gets interesting. So I'm going to turn this off for now. The first thing, actually, programming and performance. I don't know if it technically counts, but I'm going to include it in programming and performance. The beeper is different. For the X10 and VX70 ranges, they've introduced the new sound, so that's one of them. And also, you will hear this later, but when you start a cycle, oh yeah, you can't do that anymore. That's another thing, you can't just start the default cycle before you select anything. On older LGs you could just press that if it wants to work, and then it would start cotton 60, which is the default cycle. However, you can't do that on this. So let's say I wanted to start cotton. Those are the start and stop tones, which is very different to my older one. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, what was I going to mention actually? Oh yes, So overall programming, the sensing's the same. So this doesn't have the AI sensing, which is which is indicated when it does the spiral on the display, a bit like Hoover and Candy do, as well as Zanussi Flexitime models. This one only has the standard LG sensing, which I think is better personally, but it depends on what you like. Some of the things that this is different in is the spin programming, because instead of just doing a standard free burst of 175 RPM, 400 RPM, then the max speed for that spin, it will only do the extra two bursts, so the 175 RPM and 400 RPM burst, it will only do those if the load is big enough and it thinks it needs to. So an example is, if I put it on the spin only right now, it won't do them, because by default that is designed to only do the single burst, which in a way I suppose that's better than my older one, which will always perform the burst, especially when you're looking at things like quick 30, because that means you can spend a bit more time on the rinsing or the main wash rather than doing unnecessary bursts for the final spin when it's not going to need it because it's a smaller load. But if you put a big load on any cycle, really, it will sense that and it will add on the extra bursts. I don't think it removes them from the maximum length cycles though. Some people think it does, but I haven't seen it do it yet. And I've washed all sorts of various loads in this machine. So yeah, not sure about that one, but pretty sure it doesn't take the burst off if it's decided to do a longer cycle. That being said, the actual in-terms length is shorter, so it spins slower than the AIDD models, maxing out at 1080 RPM on a standard in-term, whereas the AIDD models, some of the earlier ones would have done 1200 RPM in-terms, with the later ones doing 1080, a bit like this one. However, the difference is, this never holds on in-terms, like on any cycle, whereas some of the AIDD models will hold on in-terms. In fact, I think all of them actually have some cycles that do hold on in-terms, but they've taken that away completely for this one, and now it's a bit like Samsung and Candy and those brands that just don't hold on their in-terms. So that's a minor annoyance because it will affect the rinse performance, but I can get over that. The next thing is the water levels. It's different. So on older LGs, it never used to go above sort of this door sill level. However, on this machine, the rinse level is about here, so just at the door glass level, and it still doesn't adjust the water levels depending on the load. However, it adjusts the main wash water level based on the load, which is what my older LG does. But it still doesn't adjust the rinse water level, and I think that's the more important part, especially when it's going to do deeper rinse levels than my older LG does. So that's something to bear in mind. It won't affect most people because I think most people will just throw in a full load and then put it on, so that would be perfectly fine in that sense. But the other difference between this and my older one is when this goes on maximum length, it won't add a third rinse. It will still do the standard rinses for that cycle. So even on maximum length cotton, it will still do only the 2 rinses, rather than my older one, which does 3 when it detects a big enough load. But you can kind of get around that because, as I said, there is towels, which is just cotton with an extra rinse, no matter the length. So that will always do 3 rinses. And also, of course, allergy, which does 4. So there is things to get around that, so it's not the end of the world. And the final spins as well, on older models and even AIDD models, so very recently, they had long extended final spins, which you would get on certain combinations of cycles, namely Eco 4060 and usually maximum at cotton 40 or 60, or both. However, this machine doesn't have anything like that really. It has a couple of unique final spins, but they're not really much longer. In fact, I think one of the unique final spins, which is the Eco 4060 one, is actually shorter in terms of time spent at maximum speed than just the standard spin cycle, which is a bit annoying considering it takes 6 minutes longer. That extra 6 minutes is spent going up to 1400, then immediately slowing back down, and then going back up to spend, I think it's 30-40 seconds at 1400, rather than the 2.5 minutes that's spent at 1400 on a standard spin. So it's a bit pointless. And yeah, there's no 30-36 minute spin in sight, which is a shame, because that's one of the best things about LG, I think, is their long powerful spins. But it's kind of been taken away from this range. So yeah. And the other thing, anyone who knows LG will know that the wall cycle is it doesn't really do anything. Like, it moves, it barely flips the load. In fact, I don't think it does flip the load in most cases. They have improved the action of the wall cycle on this machine. However, now what they've done is they made the main wash fill to half tub level. So that will make woolen jumpers and things float, so it will keep them safer. And they've increased the action as well to make it so it does longer swing tumbles, but alongside the shorter swing tumbles, and or scrubs, should I say. But because of the high water level and the cycle's only 39 minutes, even if you select 40, which makes the cycle 40 minutes long, it can't heat above 15 degrees because it simply doesn't have time. And I'm glad it doesn't, because that would be a very, very expensive cycle to run if it heated all that water to 40. Not to mention it probably take an hour and a half for a wall cycle. So yeah, they've fixed one thing, but they've broken another. So the wall cycle is still pretty much pointless. So anyone watching this looking for a cycle for delicate items or woolen items, I'd just put them on delicates, because honestly it's still pretty good. I've washed woolen items on the delicate cycle in another video. It's a little bit intensive in places, but most of the cycle's gentle and it will actually wash the clothes and get them clean. So yeah, just something to bear in mind. Another thing about this machine, and this is another difference between this one and older models, is when you're doing a hot wash, so 60, sometimes on 60, it depends, because if it's above 65 in the drum, when it drains, it will do a cool down, and obviously if you're doing 95, it will always do a cool down. Anyway, it has a 2-stage cool down now. So it will do the normal cool down, where it freezes the timer but moves on to rinse, as in the progress. So in the app it will say rinsing. And then it fills up with a little bit of water to get the temperature below 65 so that it can drain, I guess, safely, and not give the fabrics thermal shock when it fills with cold water in a second. But as soon as it's drained, it will tumble both ways for, I think, about 4 tumbles or so, fill back up with water to normal rinse level, and basically do a rinse, but as a cool down, if that makes sense. So like on tub clean, for example, after it's drained from the main wash, it will do that second stage of the cool down with none of the fast filtrations, because it's obviously the cool down. And then it will drain from that, do the intermediate spins, and then do the normal amount of rinses. So it uses more water, but I suppose if you're doing a boil wash, it's better for cooling down the fabrics in a way. It gives them more of a chance to come to a sensible temperature gradually, rather than doing the spin and then immediately throwing cold water onto them. I suppose that's the logic behind it. However, doing it on tub clean is really stupid, because that is a massive waste of water, considering it already does 2 rinses at the same level after it's done a main wash at the same level. So yeah, it's a lot of water for tub clean. But I mentioned that in the video as well. I think it could get away with not doing the two rinses, because I think 1 flush of the drum after the main wash is plenty. So yeah, and the other thing I will say is in the app there's no wash options, which when it comes to Wi-Fi machines I was hoping that getting this machine, because there's no options on the fascia other than pre-wash, I was kind of hoping when buying it that there would be some more options like intensive, rinse plus, etc. in the app, but unfortunately that's not the case with this range. Now the VX70 ones may well have extra options in the app, because the app is different between models, unlike on Candy for example, where you only have an NFC version and a Wi-Fi version. The app is different, you get different settings for different models with LG, which in a way is nice because it gives you a reason to spend more money to get a different model, a higher end model. But in another way it is annoying as well, because you never really know what you're going to get when you are purchasing a new model like this. Because I got this pretty much when it released, so I was the first in the community to have an LG X10. So obviously I didn't know what I was getting into necessarily with them. So that's just something to know. If you're buying it for the app, it's not really worth getting it for the app, because the cycles in the app, there's only about 2 or 3 unique cycles. The rest are kind of like towels is cotton with an extra rinse, and sleeve hems and collars is just cotton, and cold wash is just cotton. There's, yeah, you get the point. Is there anything else left to say about performance and programming? Let me think. One more thing. So, LGs have always, or usually always, been one to heat really well or over the temperature that you state. So for example, my older LG, my washer dryer, if you do a long 40 wash, it will do 48 degrees inside the drum, and if you do a short 40, it will do 43 degrees inside the drum. However, on this model, it does about 31 if you're lucky. And when you do a 60 degree wash on my older one, regardless, you always get 67, 68 degrees. Well, between 65 and 68. On this one, you might get 49, 50 or 51 degrees. Unless you do allergy, which you get 63 or 64 degrees, as expected. So yeah, the temperatures are not ideal on this machine, because it's kind of like when you select a temperature, you're almost selecting the one below it, if that makes sense. So when you're selecting 40 degrees, it's actually doing about 30, and when you're selecting 60, it's actually doing about 50. Again, something to bear in mind. It's a minor annoyance because it's not really doing what you're asking it to. Just something to bear in mind. One last thing actually, because this reminded me of it. When it's on the final spin, it has a very big tendency to limit the spin to 800 for very little reason. It's not because it's a small load, because at one point LG did have that limit, but they got rid of it, and actually I've not known any model to have a small load limit since 2014 at least, although some people claim they have, but I've not seen anyone do an empty drum yet, because if you span the machine with an empty drum and it limited to 800, that would be an indicator that it's limiting because of a small load, which Samsung kind of does, or at least did do. I don't think they do it anymore. I'm not sure on that one. But if this machine is slightly unbalanced, I say sometimes if this machine is slightly unbalanced and it doesn't like it, even if it's spun first attempt, it will just stay at 800 instead of going up to 1400 or whatever you select. And you know it's limited because it doesn't hold at 800 normally on the spin. It holds at 400, then holds at 600, and then goes up to 1000 very briefly before going up to 1080 and then stopping on in terms. Or it will go up to 1250 and then hold there, and then go up to 1360 and hold there on the final spin. So yeah, I think that's one of the biggest annoyances I have with this machine, is it just limits a lot. and I haven't managed to catch it on camera because for some reason it always goes to full speed when I'm filming it, no matter what I'm washing in it. But when it's off camera, it just limits, and it's annoying because I've waited for a chance to talk about that in a video. Because when I talked about the cycles after the cycles finished at the end of each video, I always talk about issues that we faced in that video. But because it hasn't done it, I haven't had a chance to talk about it. So I'm talking about it here instead, and I have asked LG for a software update to fix that problem, because I know my older one does it. My washer dryer does also limit to 800 every so often, but that usually does it when it's gone quite unbalanced, like when it really should have rebalanced, and it still goes first attempt. It's a thing LG have had for ages, but still clearly haven't fixed, which is surprising because the AIDD models, they don't have that issue. Their issue, well, they don't have it, they just don't limit. They go straight to full speed with everything, which is really good. It's just a shame that I don't want an AIDD model because of the drum and seal. As silly as it sounds, as an enthusiast, that is really important to me. So, again, something else to bear in mind, it's not the best at spinning at full speed. And ultimately, that's the biggest reason that I haven't used it as a daily. Because initially this was put into the kitchen to be my daily driver permanently. However, obviously, it's in the conservatory now. So, yeah. Right, sorry about the rain. There's not much I can do about it. If it gets any heavier, I will cut the video and obviously return back once it stops raining. Unless it's in the middle of a cycle, of course. So, I'm going to now move on to actual design, and I've kind of touched on the quality, but we will talk about the quality at the same time. So, it's a very nice simplistic design. I quite like the black dial, I like the black door as well, it looks quite nice, and the black display as well is a nice contrast. I think it would be quite cool if the drawer was black too, but that's theoretical. Because if they actually did a black drawer, I might not like it, if that makes sense. So as I'm picturing it in my mind, I think a black drawer would look cool too. But I'd have to see it to be sure, if that makes sense. The biggest annoyance with the design of this machine is the lack of options on the fascia. And also, when you're selecting a speed, it jumps up to the next the next one. So if it defaults to 1400, which it does do on cotton, so pressing it, instead of displaying the speed that is selected, it will jump to the next one. So I select 400 here, wait for it to reset, press it again and it will jump up to 800, which is a minor annoyance because you can't check what you selected. However, this can be overcome by going into the app and it will tell you actually what you have selected, as you can kind of see there. Sorry, my phone screen is a bit dirty. So that's a way around that. The same with the temperature. Obviously it defaults to 40. But the nice thing about this machine, and I think they copied it from Samsung, is as you go higher up the options, the pitch of the tone increases. So that's quite cool. But also, cotton has its own tone. So you know without looking that when you hear that tone, you know instantly that it's back on cotton without looking. So you could probably select a cycle without looking at all, which I think is quite nice. It's good for visually impaired people too, and that may well be why they've done that. So, very interesting. Now, the actual quality, I have said, is very much the same as my old LG. It's built really well. It doesn't creak very much. the shock absorbers are very, very quiet compared to my older LG. In fact, they make almost no noise. However, I feel like my older LG was like that when it was brand new. That noise just came over time, and I think it's a theme with LG. They sort of develop noise over time. It doesn't affect them necessarily, but some people don't like noisy washing machines, in which case probably don't buy an LG. Buy a Haier instead, maybe, because they're the quietest. I don't mind it personally. I think, you know, I got used to my older LG's noises. So, yeah. Moving on to hidden features, the only hidden features that this machine really has is the child lock and the parametric mode. So, I've gone over them in previous videos, but the child lock, obviously, when you select a cycle, hold on. So if I put it on a spin, you can lock the display by pressing spin and temperature at the same time and holding them when it's in a cycle. And CL will flash alongside the time remaining. That just means you can't press the buttons and interrupt it. Obviously you can still turn it off. See what happens when you do that. Yeah, that is the problem. It does cancel the cycle and it stays in child lock. So if you press those both, you can cancel them and then it stops flashing. The other thing is parametric mode, which the average user doesn't really need to know, so I wouldn't worry about this too much, but it kind of like you can monitor what your machine's doing almost. So you press and hold temperature and delay end for a couple of seconds, and you have 10 different modes if you like, and it will basically display information about the machine. You don't really need to know all of that. I have released a separate video about parametric mode, but if you want to know, you can watch that video to go through it there. So we'll cancel that, and yeah. So I'm going to demonstrate a quick cotton cycle now. So I'm going to wash my dressing gown, as it's got a bit of a, where is it? A bit of a stain on it. Can't find it. There it is. Do you see that? Bit of barbecue sauce and yeah, egg yolk. So that's going to go into here. And I'm going to be using that amount of surf, which is about 15-20 millilitres. I'm not going to use any fabric softener. I'm going to put it on cotton 60, and we're going to do full 1400 spin. Actually, we'll do mixed fabric, I think. No, we will do cotton. I'll demonstrate the cotton wash. So yeah, 60 and 1400. Off we go. So that's all finished. So that's what you can expect from a cotton cycle on this LG. That was the minimum length cycle, and I think it does a really good job actually. Obviously when it's on 95, and this is the problem I forgot to mention, when it's on 95 the tumbling is so different. If I remember correctly, and I do have a video of the 95 cycle, so you can go and check. If I remember correctly, it doesn't make any use of the 6 motion on the 95 cycle, which is weird because I would want a 95-degree cycle to be intensive, because if I'm boil washing, it's obviously for a reason. However, someone pointed out, and I think this is what the companies are doing nowadays. Someone pointed out that the companies prioritise the boil wash for hygiene rather than stain removal, which kind of makes sense because oftentimes a boil wash will set in certain stains. You should really wash stains out on a 40-degree wash with bio powder. So it kind of makes sense. However, things that are very dirty also might want to go on a 95. So I think they do need to factor that in and maybe have a dedicated gentle boil wash and then a very intensive boil wash. That's perhaps the way around that. Anyway, that's a couple of other things I forgot to mention. One, the balancing method is completely different on this. It has an anti-tangling method, which you saw it do several times with this, because the bathrobe is not the easiest thing to balance, but it did really well. And it does also have the standard stop and reattempt, and also the reverse tumble if it thinks it's getting nowhere with the anti-tangle method. So yeah, and one other thing which I thought about one other thing during the cycle. I was watching it and I can't remember what it is. No, it's completely left me. It didn't limit again. As I said, I can't get it to limit on camera, so I can prove to you that it's doing it. But almost half of the washes I do off camera in this, it limits on. Yet every wash I've done on camera, both out here and in the kitchen, it spins at full speed every time. Even when it went quite unbalanced here, I thought that was going to limit, because it definitely would have limited that if I wasn't filming. But it didn't, it just went straight to 1400. So, point proven, I guess. It plays up to the camera, this machine, and it's kind of annoying. So just bear in mind, it's not always going to spin things like that to full speed, which, unlike my other LG will take probably 90% of things to full speed on its standard spin, and then it can't limit on its extended spins, which obviously this doesn't have. So I guess this will probably still limit on any spin. But yeah. So point proven. Oh, I know what the other thing is. The wash action, brilliant. It makes so much more use of the 6 motion than my older LG does, and I really like that. Like that was their main selling point for 15 years, is their 6 motion. So, it's the thing that makes them stand out from the other brands. So it's good that they're making even more use of it now. So yeah. Right, so this machine is going to get a score of, I'm going to say 65 out of 100. It is a really good machine for the right person, I'm going to say. It definitely has its flaws, as does everything. And, I've talked about that earlier in the video, in the review section. But it does a really good job. It washes, I didn't show you the bathrobe, but I can almost guarantee that stain is out, because it washes well. Yep, not a sign of it. So, yeah, I mean, wash performance great, rinse performance great, spin performance really good. you know, I can't fault its performance ultimately. Just, I find the limiting really annoying, and so will the average user, because it means you're going to have to respin and respin until it decides it's not going to limit, ultimately. Whereas in another machine you could spin it once and it would go to full speed. So it is an annoyance, and as I said, I have asked LG to release a software update to fix it, so hopefully they do. But they never saw, still to this day, they haven't seen my message. So I'm not sure anything's going to come from that. So, but we'll see. Yeah. So, 65 out of 100. And yeah, I think that's going to be it for this video. What I would recommend is, the machines, it's expensive for what it is. So this is my conclusion. The machine is expensive for what it is, and it limits a lot, but it washes really well, rinses really well, and when it goes to full speed it does spin really well. So if the limiting was fixed, and if it was slightly cheaper, then I would call it, I would give it a much higher score. But I think for those reasons, I'm going to give it a 65 out of 100. So that is, it's about halfway through about halfway between all the other machines I've ranked so far. So yeah, if you have any questions, please leave them below and I will do my best to get back to all of them. And I hope this helps you make a decision on whether or not to get this machine. And yeah, well, thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, then please leave a like, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.